Hi guys, I hope that your week is going well. Today we're going to finish going over some factoring. So we're going to look at the case of the trinomial where a is not equal to 1. So now we're going to have that coefficient in our front term. Okay? So when this happens, the first thing you always need to do is look for a common factor. So that's the first thing that we are doing. If there is no common factor, then you need to think if we were to usually have an x plus r and an x plus s in our bracket. What we are doing now is we have numbers inside of our brackets, and a has to equal those two numbers times together. So when we multiply those two numbers together, we're supposed to get a. Okay? You can still use the product sum method. So can still use product sum method. However, what we're going to have to do, and we'll see it in a second, is one more step. So if I'm looking at the first example here, I have a common factor, and that's a common factor of 2. If I look, I have 2 in every single thing. I'm going to take out 2. That's going to leave me with m plus 4 minus 12. 4m, sorry. So now I'm going to look for two things that multiply to negative 12. Those two things are going to add to 4, and they happen to be negative 2 and negative 6. So I'm going to leave my 2 outside, and then I'm going to have m minus 2, m plus 6. Feel free to go over yesterday's video if you need to go over that one more time. So if there isn't a common factor, though, then we need to use a different method. One of them is called decomposition. And that means we're going to break our number into parts, and we are going to always look for a common factor first. But when we do this method, essentially what we're doing is we're taking our a value, and timesing it by our c value. And that together is going to make our product, our p. And then they still have to add to b, so that's our s. Okay, so we're still doing product sum method. So here, if I'm looking at this, I need to find two things that are going to multiply to 3 times negative 4, which is negative 12, and add to negative 11. Okay? Now we're going to factor using what we're going to call grouping. So I know that this is going to be negative 12 times 1. That, when I multiply those together, gives me negative 12. And when I add them together, that gives me negative 1. So what you're going to do, we have 3x squared minus 11x minus 4. What we're going to do is our decomposition method. So you're going to put your 3x squared. That's going to stay the same. Now we are breaking our 11x, or negative 11x, into our two factors. So negative 12x minus 1x minus 4. Okay, again, all I've done is broken this negative 11 into two things that are going to add up to negative 11, which is negative 12 and plus 1. Now I'm going to common factor my first two things. I'm factoring by grouping. Okay, so I see that I can take a 3 and an x out. It's going to leave me with x minus 4 plus, here I can just take a 1 out. Still gives me x minus 4. Now I know that I've done this right because both of my brackets are the same. X minus 4 goes in one bracket, everything else goes in the other bracket. So that's factoring by decomposition. We can also use the method of inspection. I do not recommend the method of inspection because it's guess and check. However, you can do things more than one way. So in guess and check, you are looking for two numbers that when you multiply them together in this example, they give you 5x squared, and two numbers that multiply to 2. Okay, so you need two things that multiply to 5 and two things that multiply to 2. So for 5x squared, we know that 5 and x are the only things that are going to multiply to 5x squared. And for 2, we know that 1 and 2, or negative 1 and 2, are the only things that are going to give us our desired values here. If I try the first combination, I know I get the wrong factors because when I multiply them out, they don't work. If I try the second combination, now they do work. This is why I don't usually recommend inspection or guess and check, because it requires you actually guessing and then checking. Okay, so I'm going to do the first example, and then you guys can go ahead and proceed with your work. Okay, so again, my product here is going to be 2 times negative 15. This is my product. It's going to be negative 30. My sum is negative 7, so I need two things that are going to multiply to negative 30 and add to negative 7. And those two things, my product, will be negative 10 and positive 3. Okay. So I'm going to do decomposition, so I'm just going to do equals, 2x squared minus 10x plus 3x minus 15. Now I'm going to factor by grouping, so the first two things and the last two things I'm going to factor by grouping. I notice that between these two things I can take out a 2 and an x. It's going to give me x minus 5. Between these two things I can take out a 3. I know I've done everything right because my two brackets are the same. Now I'm going to write my common factor, which is my two brackets, and everything else into the bracket behind it. Okay. This next example you can look in the textbook, but basically all you're doing is you need to common factor first, and then you're going to do the same method as above. All right, you guys can now try your practice problems, and you have lots of work ahead of you, so I want to give you lots of time to work on it. Feel free to pause and rewind if you need to.